Hi, I'm Matt Dolly, and this is another edition of Viper Bites as we continue our series preview of My Guys. That's right, I'm giving you my favorite players at every position, and this time we are going to take a look at the wide receiver position. And look, I was listening for something intelligent to say to kick off this show. So I Googled, sometimes you have to get your guys. Now, I would recommend you not doing this unless you're into Cosmo quizzes or you're into some freaky things, because there's certain things on the internet that just cannot be unseen. Now, that being said, when looking at your fantasy rosters, it's always best to get your guys. There's nothing worse than having a conviction for a certain player and then watching a league mate swoop in there, grab him, and use him against you throughout the entire season. And these are the 5 players, the 5 receivers that I'm making sure that no one in my league can get before I draft them. At number 1, it is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. Outside of the top 5 according to his ADP, I believe that Amon-Ra St. Brown has the skill set, has the ability to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. Yes, that's right, I said it. St. Brown saw 146 targets in an offense that finished with the 3rd most yards and the 5th most points last season. St. Brown, he caught 106 of 147 balls thrown in his direction, and that included a Week 4 contest against Seattle in which he did not play, so he could have had much more production. On a target per route run rate, only Tyreek Hill had a greater target share than St. Brown's 32%. Just to recap his 2022, St. Brown finished top 10 in targets, yards per route run, and fantasy points per game. Not too bad, and yet we're not talking about him being a top 5 wide receiver. That has to change right now, and it's my job to do so. Now, in just 2 seasons, St. Brown has compiled 2,073 receiving yards on 196 receptions and is one of just 3 players with 8+ catches in 8 consecutive games. And it wasn't just him producing out of the slot. I'm talking about a 121.6 passer rating when targeted, when lined out wide. It's easy to see why he became a favorite target of Jared Goff's. Only 15 receivers last season averaged more than 2 yards per route run when lined up both at the slot and out wide, and St. Brown, he was among the leaders in that grouping. If strength of schedule is something you look at for your fantasy rosters, then St. Brown, he faces the 11th best fantasy schedule for wide receivers in 2023, while Jameson Williams is away. Then it gets even more favorable when we hit fantasy playoffs, where it turns into the 7th most favorable schedule. So yeah, St. Brown, he's going to be good all year, and he's going to get better when it matters the most. St. Brown is a matchup nightmare no matter who is covering him, but somehow the Lions were able to scheme that 20% of St. Brown's targets came against linebackers in coverage, which also led to him being targeted on first read options there 34% of the time. That is one of the biggest indicators of fantasy success, being that first read option. Now, another wide receiver that is going to be a first read option for his team is Keenan Allen. Yet every year, Keenan Allen is going to be that wide receiver 1 that we are paying wide receiver 3 prices. The truth of the matter is, Allen is the last receiver that I trust being my wide receiver 1 in fantasy. That means if I go heavy on running backs in rounds 1, 2, and 3, I am going to be more than happy to have Keenan Allen be that anchor wide receiver for my roster. Over the Chargers' final 6 contests last season, Allen's fantasy production was inside the top 12 on 4 occasions. Now, health is going to be key for any wide receiver, any running back, anyone in general, but for Keenan Allen, much of his success in 2023 is going to rely on his health. When healthy, he is one of the top receivers in fantasy. Oh, really? Weeks 11 through 18, he was the wide receiver 4, thanks to a 26.5% target share, a 34.9% air yard share, while averaging 2.24 yards per route run. On top of Allen returning to health late last season, that success that he had, it has something to do with a guy named Justin Herbert finally being healthy down the stretch. And guess what? Allen and Herbert are both healthy heading into 2023. Now, one knock on Allen is people seem to think that he is a slot receiver. And while he's a very good slot receiver, he is so much more, especially in this Kellen Moore offense. We should see Allen moved around plenty. That said, Allen, I mentioned this, he's a pretty good darn slot receiver. They're averaging a league best 0.54 fantasy points per route run and finishing with 1.8 fantasy points over expectation out of the slot, which also led the NFL. He also just happens to be one of 4 receivers that saw an average of 2 red zone targets per game last season. I know that we have an age bias when it comes to fantasy football. Call it the dynasty habit or the dynasty effect. But when it comes to redraft, we seem to want to draft a redraft team similar to how we should draft our dynasty teams, and that could not be further from the truth. Now look at what Keenan Allen has done in each of the last 4 seasons. On a points per game basis, Allen has finished inside the top 12 amongst receivers, with Justin Herbert continuing to get better. I don't see that changing here in 2023. And over the last 6 seasons, Allen has averaged over 16 fantasy points per game, and he's going as wide receiver 20 because what? He's getting old? Stop it. Stop it right now. Trust Keenan Allen. Now the Chargers, I think they trust Keenan Allen. What I don't think they do is I don't think they trust Mike Williams. Hence the reason why they went out there and they drafted Quentin Johnson. He adds insurance opposite of Allen if and when Mike Williams goes down. He also adds another playmaker that defenses are going to have to take into account, which is only going to help Keenan Allen. So if you think that Quentin Johnson or Mike Williams is there to hurt Keenan Allen's value, think again. It's only going to help. At this point, I really should probably start an Old Receivers Anonymous club here because I also love Tyler Lockett. Per fantasy points data, Lockett's 89.3% catch rate on non-screens and inaccurate but catchable balls, that ranks second amongst all pass catchers. Not just wide receivers, all pass catchers. And yes, this is a very real stat. So too is the fact that when targeted out wide, he helped produce a 138.9 passer rating, which again led the NFL. Yet we are worried that a rookie in Jackson Smith-Njigba is coming forward Lockett's targets. I don't think Lockett managers need to be the ones to worry about in Seattle. It is very hard to believe that somehow, someway, Tyler Lockett is going off the board as wide receiver 30, which means he's being selected after George Pickens, after Mike Williams, after Drake London, Jerry Jeudy, and even DK Metcalf. And I'll tell you what, I'll take Tyler Lockett 7 days a week and twice on Sundays, especially over DK Metcalf at their current ADPs. Lockett, you are getting the same production you are getting out of DK Metcalf, except it's coming 3 rounds later. Last season, Lockett averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game and finished as the wide receiver 12. Yeah, that's right, wide receiver 12, and yet he's going off the board at wide receiver 30. Who's doing this? Who's creating this ADP? It makes no sense. Further to that, he was averaging 13.7 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 15. Now, when we look at how efficient Lockett was as a receiver, he hauled in 84 of 117 targets. For comparison, Metcalf saw 141 targets and only hauled in 90 passes. Looking at games in which Lockett and Metcalf are both on the field and both healthy, Lockett actually outscored DK Metcalf on a per-game basis 12.5 to 11.5 and posted 5 top 5 finishes to Metcalf's singular performance. Lockett also finished as a wide receiver 16 in every year dating back to 2018. So yeah, I think I'm locked in on Tyler Lockett. Let's go a little bit deeper here in the wide receiver rankings. Let's head to Las Vegas. How about Hunter Renfrow, who has been completely forgotten in fantasy right now? The Raiders, they added Michael Mayer there in the draft. They also signed Jacoby Myers. They watched Darren Waller get traded here. And we've also heard the Devontae Adams trade rumors all throughout the offseason. And yet, nobody is talking about Hunter Renfrow. With an ADP of 219, that is wide receiver 80. He's barely being drafted, if he's even being drafted at all. Which means there's no risk to where he's coming off the board. It's not like Renfrow suddenly forgot how to run a route or anything. He's coming off a bad year, and we simply aren't ready to forgive some dude that looks like he should be filing taxes rather than give him a second chance on our fantasy rosters. Look at what Jimmy Garoppolo does well and what he doesn't do well. Garoppolo does not have the strongest arm in the league, but he knows how to distribute the ball to his playmakers. We've seen Garoppolo support multiple players in fantasy from his time there in San Francisco, and that includes those pass catchers. Brandon Ayuk, we're talking about George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey to a degree. Renfro's entering 2023 with a chip on his shoulder after a disappointing 2022 campaign. Renfro said, "It left a sour taste in my mouth and something that I want to get over and prove to them." He knows that he let his teammates down, and I'm expecting a bounce back here. 90% of camp news is going to be positive. Let's be honest. Look, beat writers, they want to pass this positive energy about their team rather than kind of focus on the negative news. But what we have heard about Renfro, he is healthy, and that was something that he wasn't last year. He also looks more explosive than he has at any point of his career, so take that as you will. Even if, for whatever reason, Renfroe doesn't start the season as a Las Vegas Raider, there's going to be teams lining up that are going to take a chance on him if he is indeed let go. There aren't many players that are better when it comes to working on the slot, and there are even fewer that are better when it comes to third down. Heck, that's why it is third in Renfroe. And finally, one of my guys, every single year, every show I go on, you know I can't go without talking about Darnell Mooney. Now, the Bears were the heaviest run team in 2022. They're certainly going to be able to run the ball again. However, the maturation of Justin Fields and the addition of DJ Moore, that means we should see an increase in passing volume, which is a good thing for Darnell Mooney. Let's not forget that just in 2021, Mooney would record 81 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. The maturation of Fields is important to Mooney bouncing back. Only Jerry Jeudy 63.9% and DJ Moore at 61.4% were below Mooney's 60.6% catchable ball rate. The additions on that Bears offensive front, when we talk about the draft here, and Darnell Wright and the signing of Nate Davis, should allow Fields to feel more comfortable under center. While Mooney did see plenty of uncatchable targets, 25.4% of his catches came on designed throws. And that's something to keep in mind as Justin Fields enters year number 2. Now, Mooney's current ADP is of 146 or wide receiver 60 in fantasy, and that's likely due to the inconsistency that we saw last season and in part the arrival of DJ Moore. Basically, at that price, you cannot afford not to draft Darnell Mooney. I see Moore being that guy that's going to open things up for Mooney. Remember, Mooney last season was 19th in route win rate and 24th in deep receiving grade according to PFF. And that 4.38 speed certainly helped, and he still can run, I'll tell you that. Mooney is a solid second option in a passing game, along with DJ Moore garnering most of the attention. That should allow Mooney to expose defenses and create mismatches against teams' second and third corners. The Bears' offense has potential to be explosive this season. Improvements on both sides of the ball should lead to more opportunities for this offense, which should lead to more opportunities with Darnell Mooney, even with DJ Moore in town. At the end of the day, I'd rather lose with the guys that I believe in than pass up on them and have somebody else beat me with my guys. Now, I'm Matt Donnelly. Thank you for watching us here on the Vipers Network, and please take a second, hit that like button, and make sure you are subscribed.